Welcome to another deep dive, everybody. You know how we're always talking about pushing the boundaries of knowledge? Well, today we're going way back
Way back,
to the ultimate question.
to the very beginning.
How did life on Earth even begin? I mean,
Yeah.
we're talking about going from a planet of just rocks and water and gases to,
To all this.
to all of us. So,
It's pretty mind-blowing.
it really is. And we've got a really fascinating paper here all about the famous Miller-Urey experiment. The one where they
Tried to recreate.
tried to recreate early Earth in a lab to see if they could,
Cook up some life.
cook up the building blocks of life
Yep, exactly.
and see if they could just kind of spontaneously appear. Now we all know how that experiment turned out, right?
I think most people have heard the basic story.
Yeah, it's pretty iconic. But the paper goes into a lot more detail about, the assumptions behind the experiment and whether those assumptions hold up today.
Yeah, because science is always evolving.
Yeah.
What we thought we knew back then,
Back in the 50s.
yeah, might not be the whole picture anymore.
It's true.
We've learned a lot.
So much more. Okay, so before we get into the nitty-gritty details of the experiment itself, can you kind of set the stage for us? What was the scientific landscape like before Miller and Urey came along?
Okay, so imagine it's the 1800s. Scientists are just starting to wrap their heads around the chemistry of life.
Mm-hmm.
What are these molecules that make up living things? And how do they work?
They must have been figuring out so much.
Oh, yeah. And they were making some really cool discoveries. Like in 1850, this chemist named Adolf Strecker.
Adolf Strecker.
Yeah, he actually synthesized alanine,
Alanine. Wait, that's
amino acid.
that's one of the
Yeah.
building blocks of protein.
Exactly. It was a huge deal.
Yeah.
And then a little over a decade later, in 1861, Alexander Butlerov,
Butlerov.
he managed to create mixtures of sugars,
Wow. So they were already playing around with
ingredients of life.
yeah, the essential ingredients for life.
But here's the thing. They weren't really thinking about the origin of life itself.
Oh, interesting. So it was more about just
Basic chemistry.
figuring out what these things are made of.
It was like, okay, cool, we can make these molecules, but where did they come from in the first place? That wasn't really on their radar yet.
Okay, I see. So the pieces were there, but the puzzle hadn't been put together yet.
Exactly.
So when did that shift happen? When did people start thinking about the origin of life as a scientific question?
Well, fast forward to the early 20th century. You've got these two brilliant minds, Alexander Oparin and John Haldane.
Those names do sound familiar.
They're kind of legends in the origin of life field.
Yeah, from biology textbooks and stuff.
Exactly. So Oparin, he was a Russian biochemist, and he came up with this idea that life arose through a gradual process.
Step by step.
Yeah, a step-by-step process of chemical evolution. He imagined early Earth as this kind of
Primordial soup.
yeah, he called it a reducing environment, which basically means,
Low oxygen.
right, not a lot of oxygen around. And in that kind of environment, simple molecules could react and combine and eventually give rise to more complex ones.
Like the amino acids and sugars we were just talking about.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, so that's Oparin. What about Haldane?
Haldane was British, and he was working totally independently of Oparin, but he had really similar ideas.
Interesting.
It's amazing how sometimes great minds just kind of converge.
It happens all the time in science.
And he actually coined the term prebiotic soup to describe that primordial mix where he thought life first emerged.
Oh, so that's where that comes from.
Yep.
So we've got this idea of a prebiotic soup where life could potentially arise. But was it still just an idea at this point?
Pretty much. It was a really compelling idea, but it needed some experimental proof.
They need to test it out.
Right. And that's where Miller and Urey enter the picture. They decided to take these theories and put them to the test in a lab.
And that's where the famous experiment comes in. Okay, this is where it gets really exciting. Tell me, how did they even begin to recreate the conditions of early Earth in a lab? I mean,
It's a tough challenge,
Yeah.
right? So they started with this sealed system,
okay.
like a glass container, and they filled it with a specific mixture of gases: hydrogen, methane, ammonia, and water vapor.
And they thought that was
The early atmosphere.
Yeah.
That's what they believed Earth's early atmosphere was like.
interesting.
So they created their own little version of early Earth in a bottle.
They really did. Okay, and then
And then to simulate lightning strikes, because
you gotta have lightning.
lightning was probably pretty common.
Yeah, early Earth must have been pretty wild.
Oh yeah, lots of volcanic activity and electrical storms.
Yeah.
So to recreate that, they zapped the gas mixture with electrical sparks.
They zapped it.
Yep, like little mini lightning bolts.
Awesome. And then they also connected this system to a flask of heated water.
Yeah, To middle.
The early ocean. So they had like a little atmosphere and a little ocean all in one setup.
It was really ingenious.
It really was. Okay, so they flipped the switch on this tiny little Earth.
What happened?
What happened?
Well, within a week, they started to see something pretty remarkable. A good chunk of the methane, like 15% of it, had transformed into other more complex carbon compounds.
Wow, so the experiment was already working.
It was doing something.
Okay, give me an example. What kind of compounds did they find?
They found a whole bunch of different molecules, but the most exciting ones were amino acids.
Amino acids.
Yeah, specifically glycine and alanine,
Hold on. Those are...
building blocks of proteins.
Yeah, the stuff that makes life possible.
Exactly. And this was back in 1952.
Wow.
Remember, DNA hadn't even been discovered yet. So finding amino acids forming in this simulated early Earth environment,
It must have seemed like a huge leap forward.
it was massive. It really seemed to validate the idea that life's basic components could just arise spontaneously if the conditions were right.
I bet the scientific community was freaking out.
It was definitely a big deal. And the Miller-Urey experiment became this
This icon.
like a textbook
Like
example.
how life might have begun.
It seemed like they were really onto something. But as with most things in science, there's a twist coming.
Wait a twist, don't leave me hanging. What's the twist?
Well, as groundbreaking as it was, later research started to challenge some of the assumptions behind the experiment.
Oh no.
Yeah, it turns out that some of the things they thought they knew about early Earth weren't quite right.
Okay, now I really want to know. Spill the beans. What were the flaws in their setup?
Well, we'll have to dive into that in the next part.
Oh man.
Stay tuned.
All right, everyone, we'll be right back after a short break to unravel this mystery. Okay, so spill the beans. What were the flaws in their setup?
Well, one of the biggest challenges came from what we learned later about early Earth's atmosphere. Miller and Urey based their gas mixture on what we knew about gas giants.
Like Jupiter.
Right, Jupiter and Saturn.
Yeah.
And they have those massive hydrogen-rich atmospheres.
Makes sense to use what we can observe.
Yeah, you got to start somewhere. But the problem is that Earth,
It's much smaller.
way smaller, and it just doesn't have the gravity to hold on to a massive atmosphere like that.
So their starting point, the gas mixture, was kind of off.
Yeah, over time, scientists started to think that Earth's early atmosphere probably formed in a totally different way.
Okay, so how did it form?
Well, probably through volcanic eruptions,
Uh.
releasing gases from inside the planet.
Oh, like outgassing.
Exactly. Or maybe even from comets and meteorites crashing into Earth.
Interesting. So that's one strike against the experiment. What else?
Okay, so strike two is that further research suggested that the main gases in early Earth's atmosphere were probably carbon dioxide and nitrogen.
Not methane and ammonia like they use.
Right. And that's a big deal because the kind of reactions that make amino acids,
They don't work as well with CO2 and nitrogen.
way less efficient. So even though the Miller-Urey experiment showed that it's possible to create those molecules in a reducing atmosphere.
That might not be what actually happened.
Yeah, on earlier.
Okay, so that's two strikes. You said there was a third.
Yeah, the third one kind of ties into the second. It's about how reducing the atmosphere was. As scientists learned more, they realized that early Earth's atmosphere was probably...
Not as reducing as they thought.
Exactly. And in a less reducing environment.
It's harder to make those building blocks.
Even harder. So those key reactions might not have happened as easily as Miller and Urey thought.
Interesting. So, okay, the Miller-Urey experiment, as groundbreaking as it was, might not give us the complete picture.
It's not the whole story, that's for sure.
But it's not like a dead end, right?
Yeah.
What are some of the alternative scenarios that scientists are exploring now?
Oh, definitely not a dead end. The Miller-Urey experiment was like a spark.
It ignited a ton of research.
Yeah, it got everyone thinking in new ways. And one of the most exciting areas of research now is looking at hydrothermal vents.
Hydrothermal vents, aren't those like underwater volcanoes?
Yep. Super hot, lots of chemicals spewing out.
Sounds like a crazy place for life to begin.
You'd think so, right?
What?
But around those vents, you get these amazing chemical gradients,
Gradients.
like differences in concentration.
Okay.
And some organisms can actually use those gradients as a source of energy.
Oh, so it's like a natural battery.
Yeah, fueling the first life forms. And some scientists think that those vents, with all that complex chemistry,
It could have been the perfect spot.
yeah, the perfect little crucible for life to get started, maybe even for the formation of what we would call protocells,
Protocells, those are like,
the precursors to cells.
so like almost cells, but not quite.
Right, they're simple, have membranes.
You keep things in.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So you can concentrate molecules inside, get more complex reactions happening.
That's a crucial step toward life as we know it.
Definitely.
So hydrothermal vents, that's one possibility. What else are scientists thinking about?
Okay, so another really interesting hypothesis involves RNA.
RNA. Isn't that like DNA's cousin?
Yeah, ribonucleic
Uh,
acid. We hear a lot about DNA, right?
The instruction manual.
Yeah, it carries all the genetic information.
Hmm.
But RNA, it's a simpler molecule.
Simpler.
Yeah, but here's the cool part. It can also carry genetic information and act as a catalyst.
A catalyst. Like,
It speeds up reactions.
oh,
They do
yeah.
both. And some scientists think that maybe RNA, not DNA, was the star of the show in the very first life forms.
That's the RNA world hypothesis, right?
You got it.
Yeah.
So picture the primordial soup again. The idea is that simple RNA molecules could self-assembled, even replicated.
Making copies of themselves.
Exactly. And that would create a kind of evolutionary process.
But based on RNA.
Yeah. And eventually that RNA world could have transitioned to the DNA world that we know and love today.
Okay, so it's not like life just appeared, poof, more like a gradual evolution.
More like a slow dance.
Yeah, from simpler systems.
And we actually still see hints of this RNA world in our cells today, like ribosomes, the things that build proteins.
Yeah.
They're made of RNA.
Whoa, so RNA was there from the beginning.
Hard at work.
Okay, but what if we go even further? What if life didn't start on Earth at all?
Ah, you're thinking about panspermia.
Panspermia.
That's like the life from space.
Yeah.
It's a pretty wild idea, but it has some supporters. The basic idea is that life, or at least the building blocks,
Hitchhiked a ride.
exactly, maybe on a comet or asteroid.
Interesting. Because we do find stuff in meteorites.
We do. Some meteorites have organic molecules, even amino acids.
So it's not impossible.
Not impossible at all. There's even some evidence that certain bacteria, extremophiles,
The ones that love extreme conditions.
yeah, they're super tough.
Yeah.
And they might actually be able to survive space travel.
So they could have hitched a ride on a comet and ended up here.
It's possible.
But then the question becomes, how did life start wherever those comets came from?
Right. It just pushes the question back a step.
It's like we're chasing the ultimate answer.
And it's still out there. The origin of life is one of the biggest mysteries in science. But no matter where it started, a warm little pond, a crazy hot vent, or a planet far, far away.
It's mind-blowing that life exists at all.
Totally. I mean,
Yeah.
we went from particles to people. That's amazing.
It's an incredible journey, and what I love about this field is that we're constantly learning,
Yeah. Always asking new questions.
refining our understanding.
Of life itself.
It feels like just the beginning. What other surprises are out there?
Yeah.
What other avenues are scientists exploring to try and solve this puzzle?
Well, one area that's really exciting is computer simulations.
Computer simulations.
Yeah. We can actually model how molecules might have behaved under early Earth conditions. Like,
It's a virtual time machine.
exactly. We can run experiments in a computer that would be impossible to do in a real lab.
That's so cool. And what are these simulations showing? Are they giving us any clues about how life might have started?
They really are. It's fascinating. Some simulations are actually showing that certain molecules have this natural tendency to self-assemble.
Self-assemble, like on their own.
Yeah, they form more complex structures, even without things like a reducing atmosphere or lightning.
So it's like complexity is just waiting to happen.
It almost seems that way.
Like the universe is kind of pushing towards order.
It's a really intriguing idea. And what's really cool is that they're finding this with lipids.
Lipids, like fats.
Yeah, lipids are fatty molecules and they make up cell membranes.
Oh, the boundaries of cells.
Exactly. The things that separate the living world from the non-living world.
So are they saying that lipids played a role in the origin of life?
Well, what's really cool is that in these simulations, lipids spontaneously clump together into these little spheres called vesicles.
Vesicle.
Yeah, just imagine like
Yeah.
tiny bubbles.
Okay.
And these vesicles, they have a similar structure to cell membranes. And get this, they can even grow and divide on their own.
Whoa. Wait, so even without any DNA or RNA or anything like that,
Yeah, it's really remarkable.
just lipids alone can start to behave like living things?
It's pretty mind-blowing.
Yeah.
And it might mean that the jump from non-living to living,
Maybe it wasn't such a big jump after all.
yeah, maybe it was more like a series of small steps.
Like a slow, gradual process.
Exactly.
It's amazing to think about. So from the Miller-Urey experiment to these computer simulations of lipids, it seems like there are a lot of different ways that life could have gotten started.
There really are. And it makes you wonder,
If it happened here, could it have happened somewhere else too?
that's the big question. If the conditions for life aren't unique to Earth,
Then life could be out there on other planets.
maybe even in other galaxies.
It's a pretty wild thought. And a little bit humbling, you know?
Yeah, it definitely puts things in perspective.
Makes you realize just how much we don't know.
But that's the beauty of science, right?
Yeah.
We're always learning, always exploring, always pushing the boundaries of what we know.
And it's not just about the answers, it's about the journey.
Exactly.
Well, I think you've given our listeners a lot to think about today.
I hope so.
We went from that classic Miller-Urey experiment, those little lightning zaps in a bottle,
To the depths of the ocean with those hydrothermal vents.
to the RNA world, and even beyond to the vastness of space.
And who knows what other incredible discoveries are out there waiting for us.
Exactly. The quest to understand the origin of life.
It's an ongoing adventure.
It really is. So to all our listeners out there,
Keep those questions coming.
keep exploring, keep diving deep into the mysteries of the universe. And who knows, maybe one of you will be the one to finally crack the code of how life began.
That would be amazing.
That would be amazing.
Thanks for joining us for another deep dive.
It's been a pleasure.
Yeah.